Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Another busy week in BC politics, bleeding into international politics with Donald Trump and his threat of U.S. tariffs, and a lot of other topics we are going to cover on the show today. We're going to bring in the pod squad with special guest this week. Former Green MLA Adam Olsen is here joining the panel. Adam, thank you so much for being here this week.
Thank you for the invite. I'm excited to engage in the conversation.
We have, of course, Allie Blades, a conservative strategist here. Allie, thanks for being here as always.
Thanks for tolerating me.
No, the tolerating comes with our next panelist, Jeff Ferrier, New Democrat strategist and collector of excellent sweatshirt hoodies. Jeff, thanks for being here.
I'm excited, almost as excited as I am to go to the Cultural Touchpoint event that's coming to Vancouver, WWE Survivor Series on Saturday.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of New Democrats there.
It'll be me.
That'll be you representing.
Brad West sometimes.
Yeah, that'll be it. But that'll be good. I'll be there with you, so it's going to be a fun event. But let us start with another. A major American influence in BC politics this week. We have President-elect Donald Trump threatening a 25% tariff on Canadian imports into the United States, or our exports to American imports, unless we do something about the border and about drug products being exported through the border, and about immigration issues there, also the threat to Mexico as well. Let's just start here because it has prompted a big response, Adam, from Premier David Eby, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. There's been a bunch of meetings. There's sort of a discussion occurring provincially as well, with the opposition Conservative leader John Rustad saying recall the Legislature, focus some money on port security, which is not even technically a provincial responsibility. But we have all of these things kind of conspiring together. What's your take on A, Trump, but B, the kind of response that we've seen from Premier Eby?
Well, I mean, I suspect that some of the percentages there is going to be bluster. He promised a 10%, I think, and pretty consistently a 10% tariff over the last number of months, and he comes out, swinging. He's president-elect, but he comes out swinging and throws a 25%. Now, this is the guy of the art of the deal, right? And so it's really hard to get hold of him. He's very slippery. And so, this is he's coming out very hard against Canada and Mexico. It's obviously our politicians are going to have to respond to him, and we're going to have to look after the interest of British Columbia and the interests of Canada. But it's very difficult also to understand where this is going to settle. And so, we see Doug Ford coming out with strong words. I think, the Premier of British Columbia needs to match those and look out for the interests of British Columbia. Obviously, the Prime Minister as well. But, he's following through on what he promised. And, I think that it's going to be interesting to see what the American public does with the increasing costs that this is going to have to everything across the border.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to think that the end result of that and the increased costs on Americans is not something Trump actually wants. But you're right, the art of the deal maybe here, Allie. The core kind of kernel of border security and port security, though, seems to be one that has instantly been responded to by the premier and by some other premiers as well. Like, they acknowledge they have to do something there. It seems like part of the response.
Well, true to anything economic, it's interwoven with absolutely everything. And so for sure we can make those connections into immigration and border security and port policing, as David Eby and John Rustad have been talking about this week. This is one of those things where when we take a look federally. And I know that we don't talk about it too much, but here, because everything's focused on BC, but it's important to note this because it's going to affect us in the next general election. We have to take a look at the communications between Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre has already started to establish, because he's good with his one-liners of the Canada First approach. Trudeau has also been saying this, but true to anything in politics, who do you actually believe more in this? Who do you trust to actually take on Trump and have these serious conversations with premiers and offering support in a time that we're going to need it? And so I think this is really the start of where we're going to see the ballot box issue come up federally. And I didn't have this on my bingo card at all, that the trajectory might actually be that Trudeau would be best to focus on these crime and safety issues, these immigration issues, and really take on Trump in a way that might actually benefit him in the next election.
Yeah. That is interesting. Nobody really had this on their bingo card. That's why we're all everyone seems to be scrambling in response. Jeff, what do you make of the Premier's response to this, David Eby, and kind of the border issue that he has brought up as needing to be addressed in BC, especially in the ports?
Yeah, my sense is that Premier Eby came out quickly in response. That the tone of his message, which was about BC showing strength and resolve in the face of the American threats, without going down the rabbit hole of insulting Donald Trump, which is like a moth to fire for many progressives, but could prove dangerous in negotiations, was the right one. He's been reaching out to business and industry across British Columbia to keep them informed about the state of negotiations and preparation for negotiations. Rather trying to involve them in the effort, asking BC businesses, which are predominantly exporting businesses, a big exporting economy, to make sure that if they have consumers, partners in the United States, that they're well aware of the cost pressures that a tariff would put on folks in the United States. And he's taken it seriously, as are all the other premiers and the prime minister. And that's good, because let's remember what's at stake. It's not just a negotiation between politicians. People's livelihoods are at stake. I was at a BC dairy conference yesterday, multi-billion-dollar industry. They have a huge amount of exports to the American market, and there's nothing else that they want to talk about. There's nothing else that is on their mind more than this issue. They're looking for strength and leadership from the Premier. We'll see if that continues as this unfolds.
Yeah, you got to expect the dairy sector in particular in Canada is pretty concerned that Trump will come after them.
Yeah, we got mines, we got forests, we've got all kinds of goods from here, and we got to protect them.
Just to cap off this topic, Adam, anything you think the Premier should be doing or can be doing or needs to be kind of aware of as he sits at the table there with the Prime Minister and all the other premiers with varying opinions of what to do?
Well, I mean, I think that there's an opportunity here for our federation to come together, and I think that this will have an effect of bringing together kind of the fragments of our political system into one conversation. We are all being, these tariffs are an economic attack on all of the premiers, on all of the provinces, on the entire Canadian economy, and so it will have, I think, it will pull people together. It will pull those leaders together. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that as Allie pointed out, that kind of the separation between Pierre and Justin in this conversation is going to be interesting to see what the impact of that is going to be. And so, no, I mean, I think we have to track, just as Jeff was saying, we have to track standing up for British Columbia while also not being insulting. It's really fascinating to see on the American side of the border as well, just how little they understood about what Trump's tariff proposal was. They all thought that this was going to be, costs that the exporting countries are going to be paying, and not that they're going to be cost directly on the American consumer. So I think that's what, to my point earlier, is I think that there's some reckoning down south of the border as well that's going to happen here.
There was another issue I want to talk about next here, which is the issue of the NDP election promise for what I call the Eby bait, but was essentially a $500 individual rebate and a $1,000 household rebate, depending on if you qualify, coming up in the first year, and then in future years, an income tax cut. Now, it wasn't spelled out in the NDP platform exactly that this would come before Christmas. But I think lots of people were hoping that it would. And the Premier this week saying, no, it needs legislation. The legislature isn't going to sit in the fall like some people thought it would, including he said it would. And in fact, we're not going to get this legislation until February. So you're not going to get checks until March, April, sometime after that. How does that land, Allie? Let's start with you on that. In a time of the affordability crisis, in a time of the Premier's messaging about hearing voters wanting him to get back to the basics quickly and get to work.
I'm so glad you started with me, because I are we surprised, people? Like this, let's go back to the campaign where the NDP were saying anything to get reelected. And this is one of those things. Now, the fact that they want the bare minimum to form government should be a wake-up sign that they should get their butts back to work and respond to the signal that the voters have given them. Well, they decided not to do that. And I'm sure that there are a million of reasons unknown to me as to why they won't come back. And they're all going to be, once they are uncovered, because nothing in politics stays out of the limelight. Once they are uncovered, it's probably going to be like something political that, they were still negotiating with the Greens or something along those lines. But even so, we are not in a time where we could put our feet up and not see our MLAs in the legislature doing the work. I don't care if you actually don't get anything done. You have to look like you're doing something and having the conversation. And so I'm not surprised. And then if this does happen, if we do get some sort of rebate, it's not going to come for another probably year, because it'll be an excuse after excuse after excuse. And let's go back to this Trump conversation. Wouldn't that be signal enough to say, okay, maybe we didn't plan to come back in the fall and have this conversation, but because we're under attack by the United States, let's come back to Victoria and have these conversations all in the same room. But
yes, there's a lot to tease out there, because I think the legislature returning, the readiness of the Premier and the new cabinet to face kind of questions about their portfolios is one issue. And then the rebate, Jeff, is a different issue, and the ability to kind of execute on that election promise. But what do you think of both of those?
From a political communication perspective, I would have liked to see the government come back to the legislature in November and unveil some quick measures that make good on election promises. I think that Allie is right that would have conveyed to the public that the NDP got the message. Now, I have no doubt that if the Conservatives had won, they would have been back in the fall, and they would have been working hard to fire Dr. Bonnie Henry and ban vaccines and all that. So I'm glad that they did not have that opportunity and voters kept them out of office. I think it's interesting the mechanism that they're going to use for this. They promised in the election that it was going to be raising the income threshold where tax started being taken off, and instead they're going to do it this time because that's going to take some coordination with Revenue Canada. They're going to do it in a one-time payment. Why wouldn't they do it as a one-time payment all the time? You're not even going to notice it on your income taxes when it comes off, if it's taken off in 26 increments. And I think there's also, and I'm waiting for Adam to bring this up, there is the broader issue of, we're going to be talking about some healthcare issues later in the podcast and where the money goes and how money's allocated. And in the background to this is the need for investment in some key areas. And affordability is important, but we have to keep in mind that there are big pressures that BC is facing, and we need to make investments, and that takes money.
And this particular check, just the check part of this is a $1.8 billion cost in this fiscal year. And I think there was some hope from the NDP that they could use a cabinet order or some sort of regulatory change to kind of draw that money from contingencies. Turns out you want to spend $1.8 billion, you got to do it through the legislature. Thank God we have a system where MLAs have to sit and debate that kind of expenditure. But that requires the legislature to be in session, Adam. And it's not. So we have those two issues of should it be in session, but then also, if the rebate, should that be sort of accelerated, and could it be, do you think?
Well, I remember back in 2020 when the government tried to expand its ability to use special warrants, I think they were called, which would have given them the opportunity to just spend money and then go back and get it all approved after the fact. But some pesky MLAs stopped that from happening. Anyway,
Who are they?
I don't know.
Devilishly handsome, one of them, I think is, yes.
They did survive that 2020 election. I'll say that. I think what's interesting is that I'm looking forward to the moment in which the BC NDP understand that these short-term measures might bring some very, very short-term joy to British Columbians, but it is not fixing the systemic issues that we are facing in this province. This is not going to be the first time that BC NDP has given a check to British Columbians, and the last time they did it, they pretended like it was going to provide some longer-term relief than it did, and here we are again having the same conversation. $1,000 for everyone, right? And so I think it's really critical that the NDP get down to the core systemic issues that are causing the lack of affordability. I spent the first 3 years, I should say, of my political career listening to making life more affordable again, and that has basically fallen flat on its face. So I just the idea of dispensing this benefit to British Columbians through the income tax is really curious to me, because you'd think that they would have learned about how little people have realized that the carbon tax is impacting their lives, which is essentially delivered in a very similar mechanism, buried somewhere on a number or on a electronic transfer that comes a couple of times a year. So I think the check is a more effective way of the government showing British Columbians that they're giving something back, but it is not solving the systemic issues that we face in our society, where so many British Columbians are feeling. And as Allie pointed out, that the government needs to hear the message that British Columbians sent, because they very barely made it across the line in this 2024 election.
Sticking with you though, Adam, the legislature. And I know you were a House leader, and you talk about the functioning of the legislature and the importance of it. Is it okay to have an election and then take 4 months to sort of recall the House, or should it be back immediately to do the people's business? What do you think?
I don't know. I think a lot has been made about just what this session was going to be. I think in all honesty, the session was always going to be a day or two, and it was always going to be to get a new speaker installed. And that was, I think anybody who is either a current or former MLA that's suggesting that there was going to be a robust fall session after this election, I think was it was hyperbolic. I think really what was going to happen was a speaker was going to be installed, and they were going to prorogue and get ready for the budget in February.
It is a question, though, that all future parties are going to face. And now that we've changed the fixed election date to the fall, you come in, you win in October. Do you face the House right away, or are we perpetually building in a 4-month window of nothingness into our cycle? I don't know how we go forward with that. Allie, let me ask you and we'll just go around again quickly on this. The other affordability measure that the Premier could have chosen here is to match the federal GST exemptions that the Prime Minister has brought in with all of PST exemptions. So we get a similar savings to Ontario, for example, which has an HST. But there are some key issues here: children's toys, alcohol, video game consoles, artificial Christmas trees that the government has chosen not to exempt from the PST. Is that something that the Premier should have done, or would that have helped with affordability, do you think?
anything at this point is going to help. It's not going to make significant measures by any chance that people are really going to feel any real relief. That's going to come with some longer decisions, long-term decisions. But I will say this, because I always love to make sure that people understand the political nuance of it all. These things they're all going to sound really great. The NDP are going to say that we put money back into your pocket right before the budget that was referenced in February. And that way we can potentially think as voters, well, maybe this softens the blow a little bit when that $9 billion potentially goes up and we're talking about massive deficits and the fact that we're not on track to balance a budget or pay back any of that debt. So all of this, it's such a small part of the larger equation when we talk about billions of dollars in debt. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is it's right before we're really going to talk about it for a season.
Jeff, close us off here in a minute. What do you think of the rebate, legislature, GST, PST issue?
Let me talk about this GST, PST issue. It's another example of the government of Canada giving something better to places like Ontario and Quebec than to places like BC. They're covering the HST in those provinces. They're only covering the federal tax in British Columbia. So, once again, the federal Liberals are dealing a garbage hand to British Columbia. The Premier's called that out, and I think he's right to do that. On that federal tax exemption for a few months, tax off pop chips and video game consoles. Thanks for incenting my bad habits, Government of Canada. Don't need that. Please make it harder for me to get that, not easier for me. And, so it's interesting. I don't think it's going to have a measurable impact on people. It's a good headline. But it's, to Adam's point, it's not dealing with the big systemic challenges that we have to make life more affordable for people.
Okay, we will leave it there. Thank you to the panel for being here. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. We have extras this week. We're going to talk about healthcare issues and lobbying issues in the province. So lots of audio extras there as well. But you can subscribe to our video program on the YouTubes or on CHEK Plus as well. Thank you, Adam Olsen, for filling in this week. Thanks to Allie and Jeff. Thanks for you for watching. We'll see you next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.